Welcome back to the Zoom meeting. I'm so happy that you guys liked me last time I subbed. Your teacher asked me to sub again because you guys have been saying so many good things. I'm so happy for that. Thank you guys for such the positive feedback. I'm here again to teach you more about government. Yay. Okay, so let's just go ahead and dive right into it. Okay, again, I have my presentation slideshow, but we got to work with what we have, right? The Zoom or this COVID is really being difficult for us. All right, here we go. Why was the U.S. political parties formed? Okay, so there's a few different reasons that it was formed. First of all, though, we need to determine what are political parties. Political parties are the Republican and the Democratic political parties in the government. And they were formed because the struggle over ratification of the federal constitution, and that was in 1787. This contention and differences in opinions have grown as time has gone and has moved its way into the new federal government and how powerful that government would be, which is now, and it's extremely powerful. America is still one of the most growth, and it's also known as the Great Experiment, and so it's very large and vast, and it's doing very good at the moment under Republican and Democratic both parties giving equally and sharing possession in the executive branch and also in Congress. Yes, okay. And then the next page, the next slide is what's the difference between party in government and party in electorate. Okay, so party in government is the political parties that are associated that associate themselves in positions within the government. So the Republicans in Congress and the Democrats in Congress, and the president, whether he be Democratic or Republican. Those are the different stands when it says the political parties in the government. But political parties in electorates are the ones, the citizens that vote are the electors, and they are, and political parties in electorates are what those voters count themselves out as, whether they classify themselves as Republicans or Democrats. Hence, if they classify themselves as a Republican, then they're going to vote for the Republican most likely, and Democrats the same. The next slide is divided government. Is it helpful or harmful? Now, this is a very different multi-argumentative points of view, if you would say. And let's first say what a divided government is. A divided government is when the executive branch is one political party and the Congress is the opposing political party. And Congress is ruled by majority, so that would mean that there would still be, if the president was Republican and Congress was majority ruled Democrat, that means there would still be some Democrats within Congress, but the majority rule is Republican. And so therefore, this would be a divided government because the president is Democratic and the Congress is Republican. So therefore, that would be a divided but still functioning government. Yes. Some of the benefits is that all decisions that would be made or talked about would be considered by both parties, and you would get all different points of view on it, and so therefore everything would be very well thought out. So if anything got passed, it would be very well thought out and known that it would help and move our nation forward. But a negative impact is that it would arise contention and differences in opinion because if there's a Democratic president, they do not want to approve Republican laws because then he would lose the support or fear that he would lose the support of his Democrats within America, and therefore he could risk impeachment from Congress or just his support that he has gathered through his years being president. And at the same time, Republicans that are in Congress that are trying to get a Democratic president to confirm their laws will be very difficult for them because they have to change his views on them to what they want. And so that is another thing that makes it difficult. And so then it would also result in a very difficult way of ratifying the Constitution or making decisions or helping move forward in a way. Okay, the next slide is differences in states' voter registration methods. Okay, now this is an interesting topic, okay? So each state has different rules and regulations for voting, but one thing that is very common and very universal that the government has issued is that each state, or to vote, you need to be registered to vote. Now, this is very difficult because each state has its own interpretation of this. For example, some states will say that you have to be a resident of the state in order to register to vote, or some states make you pay to register to vote. And so with this, it actually turns off people from wanting to vote because they don't want to put forth the effort. They don't want to go and do more if they're already going to vote for a president. And so this is actually turning a lot away. And so they've noticed that, studies have noticed that with people just being able to vote or register to vote with no strings attached or things that they have to do, then it's very simple for them to vote, and they have a more desire to vote, and you get more action out of its citizens, which is very nice, and that is what the government wants. And ultimately, it also just depends where you want to register to vote. It depends where you live, because, as I said, some states, they don't require you to live there, some they do. So it's just always different, and you always have to figure out what it is wherever you may be. Next slide is what should happen if there is a low voter turnout. Okay, so low voter turnouts are actually very common for a very variety of different reasons. So usually older individuals, people that have actually spent time already in the nation and already learning so much about the government and living in it for so long, they are more likely to vote than the youth or the younger aspect of the nation, because it is very difficult for the youth to be involved in something they don't know fully about, or something that they don't have their own personal desire to learn about. And so that's why, as a substitute teacher, I'm trying to teach you guys more about government so that we can be able to vote and understand our government and our nation and our laws to hopefully move it forward. And so then locations tend to also have a very average, locations that have a younger average age obviously has a lower voter turnouts, while in contrast, voter turnouts are higher with older age people, like places that are more mellow and calm so that people can settle down. And that's very interesting, and we're not sure how we can minimize it or maximize it. It all depends on just people and teaching them on what to do and keep people educated to make sure that they know what they're doing in times coming. Okay, I think it's the last. This slide is what's the difference between primary and general versus general elections. Now, there are very different types of different elections. Some elections are simply to grab media's attention. Some are to get their names out to make it more recognizable. But primary elections are elections that deal with the same political parties, as in Republicans versus Republicans and Democrats versus Democrats, and then any other political parties that meet the standards to go against each other, to go against themselves. And then the I guess you say champions, or the person that represents the Republicans and the person that represents the Democrats then goes to the general election where they go against each other. So therefore you have one representative for the Republican Party and one representative for the Democratic Party. And then any other political parties that meet the standards will be able to also undergo this process to be represented by one individual. And then after those votes, they get majority vote, and that is the new president. In case of a tie or too close to call, Congress will then vote for a president. And usually, if it's usually a majority rule, will get the president. So therefore, if Congress is mostly made up of Republicans, then the Republican president has a higher chance or the Republican candidate has a higher chance of becoming president. In comparison to the Democratic candidate. So it all depends. Government's very confusing. There's very different stages and levels. And that's why I'm trying to educate everyone at this time, and myself. I'm quickly learning more and more as I try to teach you guys as well. So I hope you all learned something. Go. Voting's coming up soon. You guys got this, and I hope to see you next time. Keep telling your teacher I'm doing great.